Welcome back. We're going to talk today about community cohesion, which is an important issue, and that means basically holding society together, I guess. My friend Krish Raval is founder of Learn2Lead, which founder and indeed chief executive of Learn2Lead, organization which works with the police force in the Midlands, certainly, and is working on, well, working with people of all ages, but particularly with the young, with university students and younger people. And if we're talking about community cohesion, there are two, in my view, there are two prime dynamics. One is the disconnect between the young, and by that I mean the young from teenage and young adult, the disconnect between them and the establishment or the rest of the society. And the other is the kind of disconnect between different cultures which perhaps fail to integrate or fail to live happily one with another. There's a whole issue there. Shall we start with the second first, if you like, and talk about cultural cohesion, because it is an issue. I mean, I'm distressed by the stance of Cornwall and Devon over the migration issue. Cornwall's taking 3 families, Devon's taking 8, which is not exactly going the extra mile. But underlying this, and you talk to people about it, and people are genuinely frightened of the other coming in, and we're talking about such small numbers, but and you can understand perhaps, but nonetheless, we need to build a world in which we aren't frightened of one another, and we live in a. Do we live in a multicultural world, or we live in an integrated world? What are we aiming for?
Oh, it depends what you mean by those terms, I guess. But let's start with community cohesion. I think, firstly, the idea is, most people, when you're growing up, you refer to or you hear the term community cohesion, you think it's for a limited group of people. Firstly, it's everyone's business. If you live in a community, in society, it is your business. It affects you whether your community is cohesive in one way or another or not. That impacts on services, public services, schools, colleges, the National Health Service, and safety on the street. So the first thing to say about community cohesion, I think, is that it is not about just a limited group of people, it's for everyone. And this is why it's such an important topic. And the immigration issue, I think, is just a tiny part of community cohesion, and it's everyone's business too. But there's, as you rightly say, there's the first bit as well about, the different cultures in the UK, and that doesn't just mean minority cultures, ethnic cultures. There's the culture of the unemployed. There's the culture of the very rich. There's the culture of the systemically deprived. And we at Learn2Lead have worked across these communities and have figured out that really the way to build bridges across these different atomized groups in society is to firstly care about people from outside your own comfort zone. 2, start with particularly the vulnerable, but young people are a bridge between the neglected and the very, very well-to-do. And what I mean by that is that every young person, whether you're from a rich background or a poor background, is assailed by images of society as they would want. They have aspirations. Their mind is such that they're cultivated to, be in groups and, cohere in groups. So I think a good thing to do is to create virtuous groups for young people to be part of.
But when you talk about good groups as opposed to gangs, for example, good groups meaning youth clubs, meaning what? Meaning, what would be, well, I suppose any kind of social engagement. It could be anything that gives you a sense of belonging, an identity. It could be a rugby club, it could be anything, couldn't
Exactly, and that's right. Belonging, identity, a sense of purpose, a vision, all of these things, that human beings need. Now, immigrants need these things too. I'm not an expert on immigration, but we work with immigrants, and so sometimes I often feel that, that they may have, a limitation in English initially, but the ability that resides underneath that is waiting to come out. And I often think that the way that, studies in the University of Maryland in the 80s showed that young people respond to people who are either 7 years younger or older to them.
What we're talking about, is a society we're trying to bring this society together to have this sense of cohesion. That's the objective.
Yeah.
Is to have a society which is a cell of good living, in which we all, I like that phrase, but it's a glib phrase. But what I mean is a kind of a sense of harmony whereby everybody places an equal value on one another, and you have a society that's free of fear of the other.
Yes. Well, what do you think, William? There's a paradox. I'd be very interested to know what you think about how to bridge this paradox or how to address it. Because on the one hand, we're connected like never before in this networked era, right? And on the other, as you say, we're atomized. And it's the most ironic thing, because somebody who will not talk to his or her neighbor will talk to somebody potentially on the other side of the world and feel kinship with that person.
Yes.
Because of a particular interest.
Yes.
And I think that we fail to utilize the power of the networked era for good. We don't do enough. So most of the bad things we hear are as a result of people who, stand against modernity in many ways, but take use, mobilize, utilize every modern, social media trick and device as quickly as they can, harness it. So, what are your thoughts on how, if I can ask you a question, how could we bridge those things? Because I think it's a very important thing to do.
No, I think so.
Critical thing to do.
I think that we fail. People from the establishment are just getting used to Twitter. They're not quite comfortable with Facebook, and very often, and they're very rare will they blog in a meaningful way. And people in the establishment are frightened of even allowing that, people to actually take that kind of role, their colleagues and their fellow, because of the dangers involved.
That's right.
It's huge freedoms.
That's right. Exactly.
But the only way forward is respect for the other, and if we're going to grasp this new media age and make a meaningful difference, we have to empower those our fellows in, if you're talking about the police force, for example, in the establishment, and let go and let them do it, because
that's exactly right. Well, that's what is meant by empowering. You see, many people think empowering is, if you look at, the debates on race relations or other things, that was my point earlier on, that empowering means that you are in a situation of authority telling people what to do. And what happens is that's very comfortable for the empowerer, because he or she, and it's usually he, stays in power.
Yes, in control.
And is there because is empowering. What you're saying is let go, which is actually recognizing that for some reason you have the resources, or deservedly, and then making sure that those resources are also at the beck and call of people who don't currently have them, and would do good with them. And I think that's right, and that's the heart of good leadership.
Well, that's quite exciting, actually, because I think we can do a lot if we respect each other and those involved in the same work. It's
But the other thing you said is that, you know, there are 8 or 9 families that have been taken in by people, and then firstly, I mean, you know, if you look at the works of Mehdi Hassan or other people, they've kind of shown that there's no more change, or there's no more effect in a particular locality as a result of immigration now than there was, you know, many years ago, when, you know, some communities experienced a real change. In fact, there's considerably less in those kind of southern regions where they are particularly, you know, inclined towards UKIP or other places. And as the son of an immigrant, I feel that you know, we've just given. So my parents, I often say, worked in a, you know, came to this country with some income. Then they created a business, creating more employment, sent their kids to, you know, good schools, and gave, you know, never took off the National Health Service as far as they can help, never took benefit, didn't do anything.
Yes.
So they're net contributors rather than, and the National Health Service, if you took every immigrant out of the National Health Service, I think it will collapse.
It would cease to exist.
And I think
yes.
in the 80s, I mean, this is when I was interested in these things particularly, Lord Parek came up with a statistic that said that it cost something like, you know, whatever sum it was, I won't give a figure, but whatever sum it was that that it takes to cost, you know, to train a doctor, the amount of doctors already trained who've come here from abroad represents a kind of an income, you know, an income contribution to the United, a donation, you know, aid donation to the United Kingdom by the developing world. If you aggregate that, that's let alone the kids of the immigrants who've really, you know, underpinning these services. And that's just the health sector. If you look at accountants, you look at business, I mean, do you really think that immigrants are bad? So there's a lot of scaremongering. But the thing that's missing, I think, or is not sufficiently there, is this facilitative, you know, interpretive approach, where if people have fears, rather than saying you are dreadful, you're one, you know, and making people feel, oh my goodness, you know, I'm terrible, and then some people will either out of political correctness not say what they feel, or they will get angry. So I don't think people who feel things are stupid or dumb, but I do think that they're being hijacked, that those feelings are being hijacked for political ends that are not really to do with immigration. I mean, that's what I feel. And
so
I
more conversation, more honest conversation about these issues.
Dialogues are great.
Yeah.
And, you know, if there is unemployment, one has to explain that this is not just because of some poor person who's come into the country who's had nothing to do with this. It may have something to do with the banking crisis. It may have to do with the crash of 2008. It may have to do with, you know, resources expended on foreign policy. It may have to do with other things that, you know, that I don't know. But I very much doubt it's to do with that family that has come over seeking a better life. But I mean, there are smarter people than me that can explain this, I think.
No, you've explained it very well. I entirely agree with you. I think I always loved the, I don't know whether this is the place to say it, but the Khalil Gibran ethos of, you know, a world without frontiers. I think ultimately that's what we should all work towards in a perfect world, in a perfect society. And I know we're way off from that, and it's not even practical at this point in history, but one day it will be. And you talk about the importance of the internet and the importance of relationships cross cultures now. I mean, that's where we're moving. I know people like a multicultural approach.
Oh yeah.
But I personally, I'm a melting pot man. I like the idea, you know, that blooming pop song of the 60s, where you know the world is a melting pot and we're all going to churn out coffee-coloured people by the score.
Yes.
I think we're a long way from that. But nonetheless, ultimately, I think that's the way the world one day will go.
Yes.
And we have to recognise that and actually embrace it and say it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah. I think the discourse on multiculturalism has been appropriated again by certain interests, and so I remember the Prime Minister talking about muscular multiculturalism and people kind of pinning an ideology to it. To me, I just take it at face value that there are different cultures, the multi-cultures. Now, I think you need to subscribe to an overriding culture, or some principles of society that everyone has to agree with. I'm also in sympathy with people who want everyone to speak English, because if in India they're, where my family are from, they're insisting that people speak English, then we certainly need to do that here, in other countries. So I'm not particularly, ashamed about calling for those things, but I don't understand what is the issue that the people who are against multiculturalism talk about. Because to me, multiculturalism is not against integration. It either leads to or is the same as, or is the precursor of, or the not the precursor, it depends. Integrationalism depends on multiculturalism.
It's a fear, isn't it? But I mean, the issue is fear.
It's fear.
And it's fear of, in some way, your way of life being undermined, whether it's your children's opportunity to get a council house, or whether it's a fear.
But how does multiculturalism?
Well, it's irrational. It doesn't have
itself.
to be irrational, because.
So you can say that people arriving from somewhere else will deprive you of a job, which is, I think, dreadful. But
nonsense,
how does multiculturalism contribute to that fear?
Because
is it just that you feel your culture is being undermined?
I think that's an element of it, and there is this. The danger with multiculturalism is when it's translated into faith schools and such like, where you find then that you're stopping or halting the integration process, so that people
what do you think of faith schools then?
I'm very against them.
Are you?
Yes, strongly against. I think we're going to have to actually go down a new route with regard to education, because I think it was a step backwards, and I think that they're divisive. I went to school, and my best friend Shahina was Pakistani. Another best friend of mine, Mayur, MJ we used to call him, he was Indian, and back then we were all together in one school. Now, is that going to happen again? We were moving away from that, and Shahina would be going to a Muslim school, faith-based Muslim school, and I wouldn't have grown up with Shahina. What is that? Is that dangerous?
So that's a really good point. Can I suggest that one of the things that you might want to push for, and I should push for though, is so I'll remove whether there should be or shouldn't be faith schools in a sec, but given that we do have faith schools, and there should be meeting points for people of faith, the pupils of these faith schools, to interact with each other outside of school, which is sometimes more meaningful than what happens in school. The argument for faith schools is to do with identity, that what you need is not a sort of a bland or a sort of homogeneous or some kind of hodgepodge culture in a school. I mean, you can do if you well. Firstly, sorry, let's start. So my point is that well, I'll tell you what I believe in, that we absolutely have to have a secular society, full stop. In one of the benefits of secular society is that you can choose any religion, any faith. The idea is that rather than have an adhesion or a recourse to some other country for your faith heritage or for your spiritual inspiration, you have that within the UK. So you have a British Islam, a British Hinduism, a British Catholicism, which we have, a British Christianity that we have. So one of the ways we do that is that you have a school that is rooted in a secular society, that albeit a faith school, but it's rooted in, because it's taken advantage of a secular society, and that is absolutely British, that promotes a British form of Hinduism. So, for instance, speaking for my faith, Hinduism, it's like it's like a clear pool. It reflects whatever's underneath it. So whether it's the gravel of one pond or it's the sand of another, you can still see through it. So that's what you would want. So then what you would have are pupils or people, so a Hindu school that I know of, so up till 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we didn't have a single Hindu school. Now you do. And the Hindu high school is open to everyone, and it just has a Hindu ethos, a mild Hindu ethos in that it's vegetarian, which you are, right? You wouldn't have had that if you had. So I think it's very interesting to have all these British schools that are appropriating or interpreting the world faiths and making them contemporaneous. So I think it's really exciting. It could be really exciting, don't you think?
But isn't it destructive of our society in the long term? I mean, you're going to have a society in which we did not grow up. I did not go to school with you. Our children are going to go to school with our children. Your children won't go to school with my children. Your grandchildren won't go to school with my grandchildren. We're in a situation where we're making us and thems out of our with generations to come are going to be. I mean, it's not like
it's a fair point.
It's worrying.
No, it's a fair point, but I think you can balance that out. So because the opposite of that is that which you don't want, and I hesitate to say it, but is that you go to school with someone from another faith who will never feel and doesn't feel that he or she has the right to feel that this school is theirs in the same way that you do because of prevailing culture. So, and like an example, I take it away from school. I remember I was at Trinity Hall. I went to Cambridge University, and part of my college was chapel. Now I'm not calling for the abolition of chapel. I think it adds tremendous spirituality to the whole university experience. And I was really lucky that, my dean of chapel was very open to people of other faiths. But this was a structural bias towards a particular faith, that's part of the history of that institution. And one wonders what would happen if the Christians who graduate from there are very comfortable with their identity. Now the problem, so translating that to clumsily, but translating that to faith schools situation, what you have if you do not have regulated Muslim schools or regulated Hindu schools is homespun faiths. So people will go, the faith population of the world is increasing, and I think this will be reflected in the UK, actually, particularly among the minority faiths. So I think a smarter answer would be to legislate for interactions of faith schools, like really meaningful ones, where you become best friends with somebody from another faith community. And I think you stand more of a chance of doing that if you have a person who really knows his Hinduism, mixing with somebody who really knows his Christianity.
Can we ever do it? You look at Look at the Northern Ireland experience. Northern Ireland has been what is causing, what has caused generation on generation on generation of hatred in Northern Ireland. Of course, the Catholics were disempowered at one point and all the rest, but essentially, the main fundamental problem of Northern Ireland is the faith schools, is the Catholic schools and the Protestant schools, and the almost total lack of integrated education has just created two societies. And if we didn't have that in Northern Ireland, if the children were muddled up, then I mean, thank God now things are much better in Northern Ireland, but still they haven't got past this. And
I remember going to Ireland and somebody asking me, "Are you I said, I'm a Hindu." I said, "Yes, but are you a Catholic Hindu or a Protestant Hindu?" So yeah, I agree.
We'll have to think about it. I mean, you've raised some very important points. We're not going to resolve them here in this discussion, but you've certainly made me think deeply, and I'm really grateful. Thank you very much for.
Thanks.
Thank you, Krish.
Cheers.
You're a star.